So this isn't going to be a very formal video. It's mostly probably just going to be me rambling, but I have just noticed a huge void in what I'm going to talk about on the internet, and maybe what I have to say could help someone. The night before last, I had a miscarriage. It wasn't my first miscarriage. It was my third miscarriage. And I'm not going to talk too much about my experience. I'll talk some about my experience, but mostly this video is going to be about some realizations that I had that are going to be able to help you move through that process on your own and come away with a little less trauma, because my first two experiences with miscarriage were very traumatic. I had a miscarriage before each of my successful pregnancies, and my experience with that really tainted the amount of joy that I was able to have in my subsequent pregnancies. This time around, this time I didn't even really think that I could get pregnant. I'm much older than I was before. My periods are really irregular. It was something I was very open to and I did want. But all that old anxiety cropped up, even though in between my previous pregnancies and now, I've really found a lot of spiritual fortitude. I went through, I guess, what some people would call a spiritual awakening, and it really transformed me. So when I entered into this pregnancy, I had a different view of it. I would center myself and meditate and journal, take more of like a psycho-spiritual approach to what I was going through, and realize that pregnancy was this like journey that I was walking on that was going to take me through aspects of myself that daily life didn't really give me any reason to face. It was almost like forced shadow work or something, and I couldn't find any books on spirituality and pregnancy. I couldn't find very many videos on it. There just really wasn't very much out there. There was a lot of stuff about birth being like this incredible transformative experience that you can go into and really learn your own fears and strengths. And we've all heard this stuff, I'm sure. And if you haven't, I really recommend that you look into that side of things a lot, because there's tremendous potential to transform yourself through birth. But there really wasn't anything out there talking about that for just pregnancy itself. Most of the stuff that I found online about miscarriage was sort of, oh, it's such a taboo and we need to be brave about mentioning it. I think that we should take a step farther than that. We've been so hung up on the taboo aspect of miscarriage that we failed to move beyond that into the healing space that we can find there. Because I've gone through this process of self-examination and facing a lot of my shadows and developing some trust in the universe, this miscarriage experience actually helped me with that in a way that makes me feel almost blessed. It almost makes me feel like, no, screw it. I do feel blessed. I feel like this is exactly the experience that I needed, and I lucked out so much in being home and being able to have space for myself so that I could go through the experience in a way where it could have that impact on me that it did, which was something I never had before. In the past, I wasn't properly supported during my miscarriages. I didn't know how to support myself. There weren't resources. I feel there still aren't resources. That's why I'm making this video. You know, it's sloppy. It's not a professional, attractive video, but it's something. And I feel like if you're really in that dark space that people can enter when they go through loss like this, I don't think that you're going to care. If my discomfort with this process says anything, it should just be how much this means to me. I'm a huge overthinker. I fall very easily into anxiety spirals. I like to remain in control of my consciousness. I'm very reluctant to give up my like critical thinking patterns. This is my deal. Everybody has a different thing that they're up against. Everybody has a different thing that they are almost like assigned to in a way. It's also affected my labor and delivery processes with my two daughters that I did have, I didn't let myself enter into that trance state. I didn't let myself give myself to like the rhythms and the waves of contractions and things like that. I didn't. I tried to remain on top of everything. I tried to make small talk for as long as I could. I was people pleasing. I was much more concerned with the external world than my internal world. And things like labor, grief, deep pain, to a certain degree, illness. And I learned the other night to include miscarriage in this. These things kind of blow us open and give us an opportunity to get into the depths of ourselves. They give us an easy in, really. They throw that door wide open, and it becomes much more uncomfortable to stay on the outside and be preoccupied with what's going on outside of you, not allowing yourself to go into the fullness of that experience and the fullness of what your soul has to bring into experiences like this. You're avoiding the fullness of yourself when you're focusing outside of yourself. These experiences make it easier to access these deeper states within yourself. And I have a bad habit of turning my back on that doorway and fighting it. And that makes everything exponentially worse. With my previous miscarriages, I became preoccupied with avoiding the pain, ignoring it, denying it, being like, whatever. And this is where the way that we talk about miscarriage right now is actually not very good for us. All I was really finding was, oh, it's a taboo. You'd be brave to talk about it, and it's actually really common. It happens a lot. I weaponized that message against myself. I was like, oh, it's so common. This happens to everybody. It's not a big deal. And it became like a toxic refrain that I would tell myself to push down the pain and ignore my own grief and honestly ignore the invitation that I was given to heal myself, to move deeply into that space and not just heal myself from the grief of the miscarriage, but to heal myself from all the different attendant pain that was connected to that. Everything within me that made me doubt my abilities, or everything within me that made me doubt God. Heads up, I'm probably going to use the word God a lot in this video. It's part of the way that I conceive of the universe. I'm not trying to push anything on anybody. Fill in the blanks with whatever it is. But there is, no matter what, okay? I'm going to look right at the camera for this one. There is something bigger than your conscious mind at play. And that's what I'm talking about when I say God. That's what I'm talking about when I say the divine. When I talk about your subconscious, when I talk about your soul or your personal truth, anything like that, that I might say, it's all the same thing. It's infinitely more powerful than your day-to-day processing of reality and your typical sort of superficial linear consciousness. See, I don't know how to talk about this stuff. I'm a dabbler. I'm an armchair mystic. I'm not a preacher. I'm not a guru. I'm just forgive me, but I need to talk about this stuff because this is what it is about for me. As an overthinker and as someone who's very self-conscious, I wasn't going to cry in front of my husband or children. And I was kind of consciously prepared to move through the experience without letting myself cry and just telling myself the same things that I always told myself when I would go through this. It's really common. This isn't a big deal. But something inside of me just told me to cry and that it was all right and that I should and that it would help with not being so traumatized by this in the long run. And that's true. And that's honestly, I feel like that should be common sense. I was bleeding very heavily. I knew that I was going to have to go to the bathroom every 5 minutes. And I was, cramping and it was uncomfortable. And so I went into my room, turned off all the lights, laid down in bed, and I let myself cry. As someone who has such a stranglehold on their feelings all the time, to let go and allow myself to cry, it all kind of took me into a bit of a higher state of consciousness in and of itself. Like it was a different way of being. And so I let myself completely go. I let myself start airing all my grievances. And I guess this is the first point that I want to recommend for anyone going through a miscarriage. Get it all out there. Find a way to get out all of your grievances, whatever they may be. Are you mad because you feel betrayed by your body? Do you feel like you can't trust God? Do you feel like it's not fair? Other people get to have healthy pregnancies. Why can't you? All of that stuff that most people don't want to hear because it seems like it's self-pity and, whatever. Just complaining. Just say it. Write it down. Or like me, lay in the dark and just cry about it. And don't censor your inner world. Don't censor your experience of it at all. So I would almost recommend not having a witness to this. As much as people talk up therapists or having your partner support you or having supportive friends, surrounding yourself with people, I really feel like some of the most profound healing can come from trusting your inner wisdom and your inner voice and not actually allowing anyone else's perspectives in. I know that I've made the mistake of outsourcing wisdom a lot over the course of my life. I think that we all do this. We're encouraged to. I was told from a very, very young age that I needed to keep an open mind and listen to all different perspectives and not just assume that I know everything all the time. But there are some things that you know. There are some things that are inherent to you inside of you that you cannot find from outside sources. It's your wisdom. It's your inner compass. It's your personal connection to the divine. It's your subconscious. It's your soul. It's the truth of you. It's the depth of you. And you can reach that more easily by yourself than by being guided there by someone else or by listening to any input from anyone else. And I know it's a funny thing to say because I'm like, you listen to me, you listen to my video. But I mean it. Like if you're going to truly, deeply, deeply heal, it's between you and you. Grief and loss and physical pain and all of just the grit and the intensity and the secrecy, the taboo, the darkness, everything that characterizes a miscarriage also is at play in the shamanic journey. If you're not super versed in mysticism or spirituality or depth psychology or anything like that, it might seem counterintuitive because a lot of the times spirituality is presented as all love and light, calming your mind, rising above all of this stuff. But that is a really fragile version of spirituality. And if you want to have like a deeply rooted, grounded, reliable version of spirituality and relationship with yourself, spirituality aside, if you want to have like a deep, true, unshakable relationship with yourself that you can really depend on, you have to milk these bleak experiences for all that they're worth. They are constructed for transformation. They have every single ingredient, every single element. Someone going through the dark night of the soul and coming out on the other side, a more humbled and open and faithful person, they have to go through that dark night. A shaman who's awakening to their true power and their true healing potential, they have to go through hell. And a miscarriage is all of that. It's actually, in a kind of a twisted way, it's a really beautiful thing, and it is not a failure. People talk about it like it's a failure, a failed pregnancy, a poorly developing fetus. The language around it is all about failure and loss. And I would like to reframe that. If you're going to heal from it, if you're going to be able to try again to get pregnant, maybe, and not be completely overburdened with anxiety to the point that you can't enjoy it. If you want to find wholeness in this experience and be able to move beyond it in a healthy way and help other people, even if you just want to feel at peace with yourself, I highly recommend reframing miscarriage as just a surprise opportunity to go deeper with yourself and potentially be able to bring a deeper version of yourself to motherhood. With my first two miscarriages, there were very few useful messages that I had in my head stories that I was telling myself about it that helped me to process it and do the like minimal amount of healing that I was able to do. Honestly, I really didn't heal either of them. I went through my subsequent pregnancies, as I said, with just an open wound. I didn't enjoy myself. With my second baby, I even had profound postpartum issues. But I feel like it all came back to not being cared for and not properly healing and not caring for myself during my miscarriage and having nobody acknowledge or address my anxiety. But I was looking outside of myself for that acknowledgement. I was waiting for someone to help me heal. I didn't know how to do it myself. I feel like now I have a good idea of how to do it myself. It's not easy. I'm not pretending that I've mastered this art. And you know what? It's good that I don't think I've mastered this art, because it's going to be so different from person to person that the way that I move through this stuff doesn't matter to you, the listener. It really doesn't. The way that I move through my own grief and my own process is nonsense to someone else, as it should be, because you're going to have different hangups. You're going to have a different story behind this. Your mindset is going to start out in a different place. But I just think that the number one thing that you should do to help yourself with your loss and your grief is to reframe it as a transformative journey that you've been invited on. It's a door that is opened for you to invite you into your own depths. And I just highly recommend that you follow that. And it's going to be scary. And I just lost my light. Okay, I had a little light up above the camera that I was using to illuminate my face a little bit. Not only did the battery go dead, I think it broke. I find that fitting though, don't you? That as I start trying to talk about like venturing into your darkness, my light goes out, my light breaks. I guess like a side note for anybody who wants to turn this from being just like nothing but pain and loss into like a spiritual journey, look for synchronicities, let the universe speak to you however it wants to. That's pretty on the nose right there. That's pretty funny that my light went away. Okay, so I fixed the lighting. It's unbelievably awkward what I've constructed here to do this. Anyway, I mean, getting back to what I was saying quite a while ago. First, I should say that I didn't tell anybody about my first miscarriage. The opportunity never even really presented itself. I was abroad. Nobody knew I was pregnant because we're so universally encouraged to keep it a secret, which honestly, I have mixed feelings about. The way that I currently feel right now, I am grateful for the secrecy surrounding early pregnancy and everything, because I feel like it does set up really a nice, enclosed, private space in which to move through this grief on your own. However, I do think that there's something a little self-denying and like I've just never been all the way comfortable with how we're encouraged to not announce our pregnancies until we're out of the danger zone. It's basically like we're being told not to inconvenience anyone and to just deal with whatever anxieties and uncertainties we're facing on our own. Like nobody else wants to know that you've had a miscarriage. Nobody else wants to understand that now you're in a tenuous position with your pregnancy and that you're worried about things. That's how it feels to me. I don't know. I'll probably just cut this part because I do have mixed feelings. But yeah, so no one knew about my first miscarriage, but my second miscarriage, a couple people did know about it. A couple people told me that some things just don't have a reason. They thought it was comforting to tell me that. And I mean, I'm sure that they have their own trauma. Like, as I was saying, everybody's coming from a different place. Everybody has their own different hangups. And this is why it's kind of dangerous to let your grief hang out around just anybody and try to glean wisdom from strangers or other people's concepts or even therapists, you know, because they have their own hangups. This is something everyone needs to remember. Therapists are human beings. Therapists have their own perspective on things. So these people were people who I'm sure had their own trauma with people telling them, well, everything happens for a reason, and it feeling dismissive because, you know, I'm sure it can. But for me, being told the opposite of that really, really deepened my grief, that this has no meaning, that this has no purpose and no reason. It it messed me up. It was a very unhelpful message to receive. So I did have a couple little voices in my head, I guess. I did have a couple of things that I would tell myself, mostly just to counter those messages that I got. And one of them was, this is just an uncomfortable stepping stone on a path towards the baby that I will eventually have, in theory. And I'm sure that when that baby is born, I wouldn't trade that child for the world. And any pain that I had to go through psychologically, physically, whatever, it's going to be worth it and it's going to make sense. I wouldn't have my daughters if it weren't for the miscarriages that I had before. That was something that I had to go through. So that was one thing that worked for me. And then the other thing that I would tell myself was, there was the overarching thing of like, no, this is happening for a reason. I just don't know what it is. That was also helpful. And that's like kind of a refrain that I fall back on with a lot of things in my life. What do I know? I don't know the like grand plan for the universe. I don't know what the future holds. I don't even know myself that deeply. I just think that when you encounter hardship, it's a good idea to have an open mind and let it teach you something if it has something to teach you, because it takes the edge off. And I do believe on some level that is its purpose. That's something that I say with some trepidation, because that can sound dismissive, to be like, well, it's a lesson. The final thing that kind of would play in my head during my first two miscarriages was that I needed to experience, miscarriage. I needed to go through that sort of loss. I needed to stand on shaky ground like that in order to be the mother that I am going to be called to be when I have healthy children. They're still young, so I don't know if it's going to literally translate into me helping them with miscarriages when they're older or whatever. But at any rate, even at the most superficial level, it is a great introduction to the unpredictableness and uncertainties of parenting, I guess. Anyway, that was all that lived in my head after my first two miscarriages. Those were my only explanations that I had for myself. And I also had a lot of unhealthy stories and unhealthy thoughts going around in there too, like my emotions didn't matter. It was a common thing. I needed to just get over it. Nobody wanted to hear about it. So the other night when I was going through the actual miscarriage, I couldn't be an overthinker anymore. I was in too much pain. I had already dropped my guard and allowed myself to start crying and, I guess, silently ranting and raving. I wasn't complaining out loud, but I wasn't censoring my thoughts. I was just letting it all out. And through dropping my beloved guard, I was able to really live in the moment and be in that moment. And I spend so much time, and we all do, we all spend so much time trying to escape the moment, even good moments. We're looking at our phones, we're scrolling the internet, reading. I read a lot. I write a lot. I journal a lot. I write fiction. All of that stuff can have its own beauty and help you explore yourself more deeply, but it can also just be escapism. It can also be intellectualizing things that you should be feeling. But what was happening the other night, I couldn't journal about that when I was going through it. I couldn't watch YouTube shorts. I couldn't read anything. Distracting myself became not an option, and I gave myself over completely to the experience, which honestly is something I haven't even done in labor. I, through some sort of miracle, was able to actually let go of control and go into the experience itself, the horrible, horrible experience that I didn't want, that hurt and was breaking my heart, like it was powerful enough. It was an overwhelming and strong enough experience to finally break me. And it breaks you open. When something breaks you, it's breaking you open. It's creating so much space within you to change, to reflect, to grow. It's almost like a plow going through hardened soil and breaking it up and loosening it up so that you can actually plant things in it. It makes you soft. It makes you more capable. That makes you more able to deal with the pain than by fighting it and by trying to be above it and by trying to control it or conquer it. With both of my previous pregnancies, I wanted to go natural and I got an epidural. And I do feel like a big part of that was that I couldn't get out of my head. I was telling myself stories about what I was experiencing the entire time. I never let myself go, but I was able to with this miscarriage. Honestly, I couldn't even really understand what people were talking about when they would talk about letting themselves go. I was controlling my own consciousness that intensely. I might just be talking to a bunch of people who are like, damn, this girl's a control freak. Like, I already know how to do this. Everyone's going to find different challenges and different areas where they are going to have to break down and rebuild themselves. I'm just talking about mine. It bears saying that this tragedy of a miscarriage is what allowed me to face that very bad habit that I have, to let go of my defense mechanisms and just hand them over. I was laying in bed and I was laying in the dark and I was issuing all my complaints up to the divine. And I found I started to actually get answers. I kind of got myself in this rhythmic process, in this sort of almost altered state of consciousness where I was like, why do I have to feel this way? Why does now it seem like this? Why me? Just basically why me stuff. I sort of was like feeling the answers. It was like I was having these truths come at me. And the way that I was perceiving it was that I was accessing the truths of my soul and my life path through honest, really bitter, open inquiry. And I felt that I was being presented with the answers by a guide or a spirit or what have you. But however it is that you want to perceive of it, because I really recommend that people go through this process of deep questioning, and it might serve you better to imagine the answers coming from God or the answers rising up from deep within yourself in areas that you can't access unless you are really in the throes of grief. I'll say it again, grief is an opportunity. It's a door that opens, that allows you into deeper chambers within yourself. So however you want to perceive of that, you will discover things about yourself and your life. And you may even find a satisfactory answer as to why the miscarriage even happened. And I know I did. And when I heard it or felt it or whatever, it felt like tough love for me personally. But it was true. It felt true in every cell of my body. It was what I needed. I felt like it was trustworthy because I felt like it was an answer that came with love. It came with actionable steps. It came with guidance. It gave me a direction. It gave me something to work on. It gave me a way to apply this grief to my life in a way that would be useful. And God, it transformed me. Like it really changed me once I like dug down deep and I got to that point. But then I asked something, I was like, well, as long as I'm in dialogue with this, as long as I'm speaking so candidly with God, I asked, is what you just told me true for everyone? Is this the meaning behind miscarriage? And the answer was absolutely not. It was so clear. Every miscarriage happens for a different reason. Even multiple miscarriages, in my personal life, every miscarriage I had was for a different reason. And that was actually the moment when I thought, I kind of want to make a video about this, because I had seen things online claiming to be spiritual that were like, oh, here's the spiritual meaning behind miscarriage. It's because you haven't resolved your karma, or you have subconscious fears about motherhood, or you have subconscious issues with your husband. That stuff rang untrue to me even before this experience, because I actively fear miscarriage because I've gone through it before. Does that mean I'm manifesting my miscarriages? No. I feel like a lot of the spiritual stuff pertaining to miscarriage that I've encountered is toxic. There's no other way to put it. Like, don't listen to it. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn and be like, it's all really toxic except for mine. I have the ultimate truth, but the truth that I'm trying to share with you is that you're the only one who's going to be able to find that truth. I mean, honestly, maybe this won't even have to be part of your recovery process, knowing why. Like I said, I'm a huge overthinker. I'm deeply intellectual in a bad way. And so for me, it actually is really helpful to have some sort of an explanation because I'm going to spin myself in circles stressing out about what was the reason behind this? Why did this happen? Could I have done something differently? Spiritually, what's the meaning in this? I can get neurotic about spiritual things. I'm a mess spiritually. There's so many pitfalls on that journey. People might get too arrogant and think they know everything and make a YouTube video. Or they could just spin out and question everything and wake up every morning having a new crisis of faith. For me, it really did help to be given a bit of a reason why it happened to me and to be ushered into a different direction of, these are some things that you could be learning from this and that you should focus on. And it was being in that open space with my guard completely dropped, in the dark, alone, not looking anything up online, not reading any books, not trying to journal about it and consciously unpack what was going on, just completely opening up and letting myself fall apart. That's what allowed in the answers and the guidance that I personally needed in order to turn a very dark experience into something positive. And I guess that's what I recommend to you. And obviously you don't need to do it exactly when you're in the throes of miscarrying. As long as you're grieving, as long as there is that pain inside of you, as long as there are doors that are open inside of you, inviting you to go in deeper, you can do this. And it's not anything intimidating. It's not a meditative process where you calm yourself down. It's almost the opposite. Let yourself feel everything. Like open those doors wider. Pry open your soul. Just be blubberingly honest. Make your mind shut up. Don't let your brain tell yourself stories about it. Don't let your brain tell you, well, I must not be as good as these other mothers, or I don't deserve this. Don't create narratives like that, or whatever it is that you're given to. Those are just some of the things that my brain likes to come up with. You're the only one who's going to understand this sort of bad habits that you can fall into, any style of spiritual bypassing you might do, any self-dismissive denial. You might be the type of person who falls really heavily into self-pity, someone who identifies with themselves as a victim and really lets that pain linger without actually going into and exploring it. And like no matter what it is that your issue is, we all have different issues and none of them are better than others, but those are all stories that we tell ourselves is kind of what I'm getting at. And the process that I accidentally discovered the other night was a way of letting yourself actually get so emotional and letting yourself feel whatever pain you were feeling. And in my case, the physical pain was helpful because it really helped take my brain offline. But God, emotional pain can take your brain offline too. Grief can take your brain offline. Like that's what it's intended to do. There is a madness to grief. Anyone who's ever really faced grief knows this. It can drive you insane, and that's the point. It takes your brain out of commission. It puts you in an altered state of consciousness, and that's where you actually should be in order to move through that. And I guess what I'm trying to share is that that is a state that we should welcome. It's a divine opportunity. It's a sacred space. It's a blessing. We don't do ourselves any services by only talking about it in negative terms and only being like, oh, it's such a sad, meaningless thing. It's such a dark, tragic thing. It's such a hard loss. It's a dark blessing. It's an invitation to so much potential growth and healing. So here, I guess I want to recommend a book. It's Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. It's a really famous book. It's a classic. So Viktor Frankl was a Holocaust survivor and a psychologist. You can really trust when he says that meaning can be found in suffering, and that meaning making is pretty much the essence of life. Because Frankel had been through something so undeniably brutal and lost so much, and really, really, really faced the very definition of what one could call meaningless suffering and madness and godlessness. And he lived to tell the tale and come away from it all saying, you have to give it meaning. That's how you survive. That's not only how you survive spiritually when you move through it, but he credits that impulse within himself for his physical survival as well. You know, it's obviously not a book about miscarriage, but it's a deeply psychological and spiritual book. It's a helpful message coming from a source that you can trust. There's no fluff, you know? I know that when you're going through something really, really hard, your fluff detection meter is probably cranked up, which is probably why the people who told me that some things don't have a meaning is probably why those people were so bothered by hearing everything happens for a reason, because that can be fluff. And they wanted to protect me from that or something. But I resonate much more with Viktor Frankl. I feel like if you fall more on the side of deriving comfort from nihilism, this just isn't the video for you, and you've probably clicked away by now. And I'm not trying to say that no comfort can be found in that. I just can't find any. I do know that I've tried. I've dabbled in that neighborhood. I almost feel I've been pushed into that neighborhood by society broadly, by certain people I've known. I was naturally spiritual as a kid. I was just kind of born with that sort of personality, which brings me, I guess, to my next point. Another thing then that happened after I sort of went through the process of crying, laying out all my grievances, listening for answers, integrating these hard lessons that I felt like I was learning, while also being incapacitated with the miscarriage itself. Basically, after the worst of it had passed, my husband came in and he laid down in the dark beside me. With my past two miscarriages, my husband, he really wasn't very supportive. Didn't know how, didn't really feel connected to the experience. It's not like this is something that they train guys in, but it kind of drove a wedge between us and our relationship. And I think both of us are much more conscious now. And so another sort of silver lining of this experience for me is that I feel that this time it's actually bringing us closer together. But he came in and he laid down next to me in the dark. I made him not turn the light on because I was kind of having a moment. And I felt like after going into the depths of myself the way I had and connecting with powers beyond me, it was at that point that it felt more appropriate to open up to another person and to potentially let in someone else's input. But I wouldn't recommend that as like the first line of defense. I think that we are called within first with grief. That's why it's such a hard thing to talk about. That's why it's such a hard thing to communicate to other people. It's such a hard thing to relate to when you're not going through it. It makes for a million awkward conversations. I think that's by design. I think that's because it's supposed to push us deep, deep within to find what we're truly capable of, what our actual values are, what our truths are, what we need to change or rely on or whatever it is. I feel like the clumsiness of conversation around this is intentional. It's supposed to be letting us know that this is a sacred, personal, inner journey, not a dialogue to have with a person outside of you who's not going through it. But like I was saying, there is a place for that too, because you do have to still live in the world and you still have to connect with the people around you. And you can discover new layers of things through those conversations as well. Hopefully not through conflict, but that's a common one. I got lucky the other night. I didn't have to make any discoveries from telling my husband that he didn't understand me. I got to actually uncover things through his patient listening and his own introspection on his own feelings, and that's ideal, but that's not always the way it goes. And we should also be open to healing through the less positive conversations that can come up, because they all sort of point to our wounds and point to our potentials, and it points things out to us. Talking to my husband, I had this realization, because we were talking about whether or not we wanted to try again, and I had this memory, and it's not just a single memory. It was like a holistic, like, this is how I felt as a child all the time. When I was very, very, very young, I wanted a huge family. I wanted 10 kids. I wanted massive holiday events. I wanted people around me all the time. I came from a small family. I've gone on to have a small family. And I've always felt really like contracted in on myself and shy and insecure and blocked off. And I had this realization that I had never bothered to pursue my childhood vision for my life. I'd never bothered to pursue my childhood dreams. And I just told myself that they were illogical, and I prioritized my brain over my heart for my entire adult life. Once I had this realization and I like really, really felt my inner child within me, I was crying so hard I could just barely even choke the words out. I've never been able to do inner child work. I just never have. I've done guided meditations. I've read books about it. I've never been able to do it. When people say, oh, remember what it is that you wanted as a child and do that now, I felt like I had. Well, I had kids. I wrote books because when I was a kid, I wanted to be an artist and I wanted to be a writer, and I've done all those things, but I haven't really. I did them in a logical adult fashion. I did them in a way where I judged myself. I did them in the way that I felt was the most practical. I did them in a way where I held myself back creatively. I didn't do it in the free way that I imagined myself doing it as a child. I didn't revel in the creative process of my novels or of my children or really of much of anything at all. And so I didn't know how to do inner child work. On paper, it looked like I was doing just fine, but it's a feeling, it's a type of freedom that children allow themselves. That is what you're really supposed to get at, I think, when you're doing this sort of stuff. And I actually successfully tapped into that, and I still feel very connected to that. And that's just profound. And it makes me feel grateful. It makes me feel, honestly, it makes me feel grateful that I had a miscarriage, because I didn't know how to do that. There was no other way that I would have been able to do that. I really think that we are lacking a psycho-spiritual grasp on the process of pregnancy and miscarriage, and all the different components that can go into it. I would speak on stillbirth if I could, God forbid. I feel like people who've gone through that are stronger than me. I think about that as an unaddressed aspect of what the parenting experience can be. I'm really interested in death doula work. I'm very interested in the process of grief in general. So I apply that to my process with things like miscarriage. And so I'm sure that kind of helped push me into the headspace that I'm in right now. But I feel like we could all stand to blend things a little bit more. We live in a world right now that really likes to separate things. We live in a world right now that likes labels, it likes definitions. It's a very like digitally machine-based reality that we are embedded in. It's present in the way that we talk about ourselves. We talk about ourselves more often than not as the sum of our parts, but we're not machines. And kind of like me with my control over my emotions and all my guardedness and my hyper intellectualization of everything, only finding healing, and I'm just like dissolved with pain and grief, really speaks to the power of loosening these boundaries between things and letting things blur together. I feel like death work and grief psychology and all of that, like, actually really does have a place in the conversation about reproduction, not just because of miscarriage and stillbirth, but also because when you successfully complete a pregnancy and become a mother, your old identity has died. There's sacredness and transformation and darkness and fear and an opportunity to heal on every level of this journey. And I think we're missing out on a lot of that. We tend to talk about it as a purely physical experience, like, oh, this week your baby's the size of a pear. We kind of infantilize it. We make it cutesy. We make it neurotic. We obsess over calories and vitamins and avoiding certain things. And we don't really appreciate it for the terrifying, cavernous, unknown void that we're diving into every time that we open ourselves up to the universe as channels to bring something new into the world. That's what motherhood is. That's what pregnancy is. Even from a purely physical standpoint, you are creating something entirely new. There's no way around that being utterly profound and psychologically destabilizing. It's deep, and I don't know how much I would understand of that if I hadn't gone through 3 miscarriages. With each one, my understanding of this has gotten deeper. And I have so much respect for the process of creating life that I don't think I would have had otherwise. And I have to acknowledge that. I have to sort of like tip my hat to the fact that I have been through this darkness and come out wiser, possibly more scared, but any true journey into the self or any journey of learning something new even, there's fear involved. And so it isn't necessarily true to tell myself, like I have in the past, that I've lost the opportunity to have my like wonderful, blissful pregnancy if I'm able to get pregnant again and have that work out. The opportunity that I now have is to have a deeper, richer pregnancy instead of one where I maybe don't understand the depths into which I'm trudging. I guess there's really only 2 more things that I want to say. Thank you for sticking with me, and you're welcome if this has helped you at all. One other point that I want to make about this whole thing of reframing miscarriage as a rite of passage, as more than a failure, as an experience to be honored and respected and upheld as potent and powerful and transformative. I want to say that you should take care of yourself. Physically, take care of yourself. I found over the past couple days, especially when I was really, really going through the worst of the miscarriage, I couldn't eat. I could barely drink anything. So as the pain sort of started to subside and I felt really depleted and I'd lost a ton of blood and I felt shaky and lightheaded and, I had my husband make me some bone broth. And that just felt so nourishing and it felt really good. It kind of reminded me of being sick as a little kid. I had like this really soft blanket with me. And I realized that in the past, I'd never cared for myself physically when I had miscarried. I hadn't cared for myself physically after giving birth. But that's because I felt that I had permission to do that. There was a precedent for that. There were a lot of people pulling for that. You got to sleep when your baby sleeps and make sure to replenish your iron. I just never heard anybody talk like that about miscarriage because I had let myself feel all my feelings and go through that process. I was in a state of mind where I was able to be gentle with myself and I wasn't just committed and locked into pushing myself away and denying my feelings like I'd been in the past. I knew what it was that I wanted and needed, and I let myself have that. It felt nice to give myself that little extra attention and admit that I needed that and that I needed some care and that it wasn't just like, oh, I failed at pregnancy and now I just need to move on and get over it and move on to the next thing and try again and just forget that one. I was like, no, I'm going through something. I need to set time away for myself physically as well as mentally to make this into almost like a special event. And so I've been taking it easy, just eating what I feel like I need to eat. Ate just a ton of chocolate yesterday afternoon. It seemed like the right thing to do. Don't forget to take care of yourself physically, because that in and of itself is going to communicate to you to be gentle with yourself. You are in a tender, sacred space right now. Take time for yourself. Don't discount it. Don't think about how long you were pregnant or however short. It doesn't matter how short it was. It doesn't even matter if it was a chemical pregnancy and you were like, had just found out and then it vanished. One of my miscarriages was a blighted ovum, and that messed me up. To be told like, well, there was never anything here. You just spent like 11 weeks bonding with nothing. That was my second one. That was the hardest one to deal with for me. But the thing is even then, even in a situation like that, you're not connecting with nothing. You've opened yourself up to the universe. You've allowed energies to course through your body, however briefly, and those energies were real. And whatever it was that you were connecting with, whatever was growing inside of you, whatever you were imagining, whatever you were feeling, it was real. And that needs to be acknowledged as well. Grieve however you need to grieve. One of the hardest things that I did the other night was when I actually passed the fetus, the sac and everything, all of that, and I flushed it down the toilet. That's where it went, That's where it was. And God, it felt sacrilegious. It felt wrong. It felt gross. It felt inhumane. And it felt like it could push me into a place where I could deny the experience that I'd had, where I was like, well, that's all that was worth. That's all I was ever connecting with, was something that just gets flushed. It wasn't an honorable burial. It wasn't a beautiful thing. And so my way of dealing with that was I chose a little green emerald heart, just like a raw emerald, not like a fancy expensive one. This little emerald heart that I bought when my husband and I decided that we wanted to actually try for a third and final child. Right around then, I bought this little pendant that I put on a chain, and I would wear it, and I ended up associating it with the baby, all the fantasies that I had about that baby, all the different ways that I imagined that it would be. And then when I got pregnant, by then I had really locked in this myth around this little heart pendant. And so I'm burying that in the backyard as like a stand-in. Something like that might help you grieve if you happen to have an object or something symbolic, something representative. There's these things called Jizo statues. I think that's how you pronounce it. Jizo. They're these little Buddhist statues that are used for pregnancy loss. You can look it up. I'm not going to describe the whole ritual around them or anything, but we've had one for years. My husband bought it for me as a way to sort of have like a symbolic object to represent the babies that I've lost. Now it sort of acts as like a grave marker for this little emerald heart. If it's helpful for you, just open yourself up to physical representations and symbols that you can use to grieve in this process, where there really there isn't likely to be much physical thing to grieve. It can make it feel very tenuous, and it can make it very hard to sort of wrap your mind around. It just sort of makes it feel more real. That can be a really helpful thing to do for yourself. So don't forget to acknowledge the physicality of the pregnancy that you had in whatever way you deem helpful. These are just things that people sometimes forget about. People don't tend to have funerals when they have miscarriage. There isn't like a culturally sanctioned, built-in common way to grieve. So you can just make up your own, I guess. Which is cool, really. It can be really cool. Having been to funerals, I don't always feel like they're helpful. I've had funerals make me actively feel less healed because they felt like they lacked a level of sacredness that I was desiring. So embrace it. Look forward to having the opportunity to create something that's custom tailored to you and your baby. As much as it really, really hurts to feel unseen, it's again, yet again, it's an opportunity. It's a secret blessing. There are little things built into this that can help you become a stronger person, a more creative person, a person who's more in touch with themselves and in touch with their soul and what it is that they really need and how to be like stable and whole and strong in this world. I feel like I've said all that I need to say in this video and then some. I feel like I've said an awful lot. And if anybody has listened to this whole thing, my heart goes out to you because that must mean that you really need it. I wish that I had more that I could say that's useful, I guess, but it really it boils down to you finding that for yourself and reframing this experience as an opportunity to do that for yourself. Just showing yourself love and learning to trust that your inner experiences, your secret experiences, your private pains have value and they're meaningful and they can enrich you and they deepen your experience of life. But I'm truly sorry if you're going through this. I know what it's like. I'm going through it right now. So I kind of have the fantasy that maybe I could get pregnant again and make another video about managing the inevitable anxieties that follow an event like this. But I don't get to decide what happens next. And I actually feel at peace with that right now, which again, I think is a gift that I've gotten from this experience and allowing myself to go so deeply into it and actually really, 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 really feel it. That has put me in a place where I can make peace with it, where I don't feel like I have to run away and desperately try to conceive again immediately, which is how I responded before. I feel like this has given me the opportunity to sit still and actually really connect with myself. And I'm thankful for that. And I really hope that you can find a way to feel similarly. And I hope that in some way this helped. My heart is with you and I wish you the best.